I was about 16 at the time, living at home deep in the mountains at my family's home. I frequently walked in the woods surrounding my home, but never really went that far out, either out of lack of curiosity or simply because I was lazy. One evening, I decided to take a flashlight and walk as far as I comfortably could into the valley behind my property. There are many deer, bears, and other animals near where I live. So I also brought some bear spray with me. I was about 25 minutes, maybe more, into my walk when I started to get an uneasy feeling like I was incredibly vulnerable or that I wasn't alone. I shrugged it off because I probably wasn't alone. I mean, there's a lot of wildlife in the forest, so it's not like I can just expect to be alone. I neared the creek that flowed around the property, and I noticed some garbage. There were some pots and pans next to the water, as well as what looked like a tattered sleeping bag and some shoes. I didn't think much of it, and I continued my walk, thinking about it every now and then, and wondering if somebody was camping out near our house. It was almost completely dark by now, so I turned around and began to walk home. I kept glancing over my shoulder back towards the creek, worried that somebody might be behind me. About 5 or 6 minutes of walking in the pitch black, and I heard some branches snap a little ways behind me. My blood ran cold, and I felt my heart skip a beat. I turned around and spent a minute just shining my flashlight in every direction, wondering if a deer or even a bear was following me. Once I felt sure that nothing was there, I kept on walking. Not even a minute later, I heard running footsteps trampling behind me. I didn't even turn to look and see what it was or who was there. I just began running as fast as I could. I'm pretty sure I called out pleading with whatever it was or whoever it was to stop. I desperately sprinted through the trees trying to keep my flashlight pointed forward so I didn't trip or fall. I kept hearing footsteps stomping behind me and branches being snapped off the trees violently. I heard pained grunting and what sounded like someone violently growling. I began crying out of fear. I heard one loud growl or scream right behind me as whatever it was seemed to have fallen or slipped up, and I kept sprinting and never dared to look back. I eventually stopped hearing the running behind me. Once I made it to my property line, I saw the light of the house in the distance ahead of me, and I turned to see if I was still being followed. What I saw still torments me even now. A freakishly tall man standing about 100 yards away from me with my flashlight barely illuminating him. He was wearing what looked like a tattered hoodie and no pants. I stood there for a moment, struck with fear, waiting to see if he would move. As I was about to turn away and run the last stretch to my house, he started sprinting viciously towards me. By vicious, I mean he was almost on all fours, using the trees to propel himself further, grabbing at the ground, lunging towards me. I let out a scream and ducked under my fence and sprinted as fast as I could back to my house. By the time I got there, I was completely out of breath. My throat hurt, and my knees were sore. I shined the light back towards the woods and saw the man at my fence waving at me, his tall, slender figure towering above the fence. I quickly made my way inside and locked all the doors. I woke my dad up and told him what happened. I don't remember exactly what he did about it, if he called the cops or just let it be, but I don't think anyone else ever saw the guy again. I still never go out into the woods alone or any time near dark, and I certainly stay away from the creek. I don't know if he's still out there. Hopefully, he packed up the camp, which I assumed was his, and moved on. This happened last summer and is probably the weirdest and scariest thing that has happened to me. It was a warm New England summer night, and my friend was sleeping over at my house. He and I have always been night owls, so whenever we sleep over at each other's houses, we usually stay up late. We were up at around 2 o'clock in the morning, bored out of our minds, trying to think of stuff to do. We both into the outdoors, so I came up with the idea to go on a short hike near my house. We brought some firecrackers to light off and some music. Looking back, it was a dumb idea. I live on a rural dirt road surrounded by woods, so there's a decent number of trails near me. We got there, and unexpectedly, it was very muddy and I had dropped my flashlight, which broke it. We were considering turning around, but we ended up just using our phone flashlights. I've been to this place before, and I knew of a pond with a dock that was on the trail that we could go to. The hike to the dock only took about 20 minutes. When we got there, we were greeted by hundreds of frogs croaking constantly, which made us a little on edge, but we stayed. We lit off some of those little red firecrackers that make a loud noise, but no fire. We started to play some music on our speaker, and we were starting to have a good time. That's when my friend told me to turn the music down because he thought he heard something. I turned it down, and there was a sound of an engine in the not-so-far distance. It sounded like an ATV or another type of small vehicle. Now, these trails are known to have vehicles like these riding on them, so it's not out of the ordinary to hear those type of noises out there, but all I could think of was who would be out riding at this time of night. It was probably around 2:30 in the morning when we heard the noise. The sound was coming closer, and we decided to quickly pack up our stuff. Whatever vehicle it was coming to our location, and we didn't know what else to do. So, we hid in the nearby bushes and ditch. The vehicle had reached us and had stopped just before the opening to the dock and was just idling for a solid 5 minutes there. This is the weird part. Whoever it was had their headlights turned off and most likely used a small flashlight to navigate, so we could not see their location. They were purposely trying to not be seen. Why would anyone with good intentions want us to not see them? Our hearts were pounding at this point, and we were genuinely scared. After 5 minutes, the vehicle left the opening and headed off in another direction. Once we thought it was far enough away, we booked it back to the car using my phone's screen light to see. On the way back, we saw fresh exhaust smoke lingering and tire tracks on the trail, which means they saw our car at the trailhead and knew we were there. Thankfully, we made it back to the car and went home. The whole situation felt like pure survival instincts. Maybe somebody was late night cruising on the main road with their ATV and saw our car. Maybe they thought we were lost and needed help or something, but that didn't explain why they were hiding their location. Besides the whole no headlights thing, I also thought it was weird that somebody would be out there at that hour on their off-road vehicle, as that would be a dangerous drive, especially with no headlights. This occurred in the year 2000. My best friend and I were avid outdoor adventurers and amateur pot growers. We would frequently find secluded places in the woods that allowed for ample light and shade for plants to grow that would not allow them to be easily found. One day we went to walk a bunch of trails located near a state park trail system. The trails weren't in the park, but I had hiked them before, and I knew they weren't that frequented often. We had gone out that day with our seeds partially sprouted in moist paper towels. We parked the car at the trailhead and started hiking in. We covered a mile or so, and then ventured off the trail into the woods. We found a clearing, planted the seeds, and tied a few barely visible ribbons off to mark the way to the plant spot to check them in the future. My friend and I got back on the trail and started walking back to the car when my friend noticed a man in the other direction just staring at us. He was probably in his 30s or 40s, bald head and normal clothes. We didn't think anything of it for the most part, but we kept looking back as anybody would when someone is behind them in the woods. We saw that he was walking about 60 feet or so behind us. It seemed weird, but it was probably more so due to us having anxiety that we planted seeds. We picked up the pace, but the man also seemed to pick up the pace as we weren't gaining any distance. At one point, we decided to just get off the trail and let him pass. We turned off the trail and walked into a thicket of sticker bushes, which I remember vividly getting cut pretty good on. We got deeper into the woods and heard cursing. When we turned around, the man was coming through where we entered. It was at that moment we became truly scared. Mind you, we were two young, strong 19-year-olds, but a man following you in the woods is creepy regardless of who you are. We made a kind of U-turn maneuver to outflank him and came out of the woods a bit farther down the trail. Once back on the trail, we ran. As we were running, there was a fork in the trail, and my friend went right, and I went left. I realized my mistake as my buddy was going down the correct path, and I wasn't. So, I turned around and started running back towards the fork to follow my friend. As I was running towards the direction we came from to get to the fork, I could see the man running towards me down the trail. He was a distance away, but not far enough in my eyes. Survival mode kicked in, and I ran as hard as I could. I caught up to my friend who was walking. At that point, I screamed that he was after us, and we both booked it all the way back to the car. We got in the car shaking and out of breath. We backed up and started to get out of the parking lot when the man appeared at the trailhead. He stopped there and was just staring at us as we drove away. I always wonder what that was all about. Did he want to kill a couple of 19-year-olds? Or was he also doing something illegal in those woods and just wanted us gone by scaring us? My buddy and I still laugh and talk about that day years later. During the COVID lockdown in 2020, I got very into running through a wooded area near my apartment. There was a paved path that was flat and more populated by people. And then there was an alternative trail that consisted of winding dirt paths that inclined and twisted into the woods and surrounding fields. I always took these trails because I love woods and they were much more private. I rarely saw other people, just another runner or dirt biker here and there. I'm an extremely hyper-aware and paranoid person, but I did feel safe doing this alone because the paved path always had a bunch of people on it. I was also actively trying to stop letting fear run my life. Still, I always took precautions like bringing my knife and mace with me and not using headphones so I could be a bit more aware of my surroundings. However, literally the one singular day I ever laxed on these precautions is the day some crazy thing happened. This day, I forgot my knife, but I still had my mace, and I decided to listen to music in my headphones. I had taken off of my usual dirt path and was running around a bend. When I cleared the bend, suddenly, right in front of me, maybe about 10 feet away, there was a man completely naked standing there. Completely naked except for a black gas mask that wrapped around and covered his entire head. The scary-looking ones with the tubes. I was absolutely stunned and just froze dead in my tracks. Music still playing in my headphones. I was just frozen staring at him while he stared at me, doing stuff with his genitals that I don't need to explain further. He was saying or yelling something at me, but I couldn't hear over my music. I couldn't move for what felt like forever. I still had my mace with me, but he was wearing a gas mask, so that would have been ineffective. It seemed like he had put some thought into expecting women, or people to probably carry mace with them. Eventually, my body just slowly turned around and calmly walked away until I rounded the bend again. And then I bolted all the way until I came back out to the populated paved path below. I was stunned, just totally in shock, and started walking the paved path in a daze. I started going up to women I passed and warning them, and I ended up with a group of people telling me to call the cops. I didn't want to do this because I knew they would show up 20 minutes later and the guy would be gone, and then they would write something down, and nothing would come of it. But I did it to put everyone else at ease. And sure enough, that's what happened. They kept asking me questions about his appearance, like hair color, and I didn't know because he had a gas mask on his whole head. Safe to say, I never returned to those woods again. When I was about 9 years old, my family and I lived in a house with a fairly big wooded area behind our backyard. I say fairly big because it wasn't big enough that you could really get lost in it for very long. It was big enough that you could walk in it for a good 20 minutes before making it to the center. It got thick in some areas, but you couldn't see any houses from the neighborhood once inside. To my friends and I, it was a magical world. We played in those woods all summer long. My mom would let us go there as long as we were back by sundown. This was the early 90s, and times were a little different then. I was absolutely stunned and just froze dead in my tracks. Music still playing in my headphones. I was just frozen staring at him while he stared at me, doing stuff with his genitals that I don't need to explain further. He was saying or yelling something at me, but I couldn't hear over my music. I couldn't move for what felt like forever. I still had my mace with me, but he was wearing a gas mask, so that would have been ineffective. It seemed like he had put some thought into expecting women, or people to probably carry mace with them. Eventually, my body just slowly turned around and calmly walked away until I rounded the bend again. And then I bolted all the way until I came back out to the populated paved path below. I was stunned, just totally in shock, and started walking the paved path in a daze. I started going up to women I passed and warning them, and I ended up with a group of people telling me to call the cops. I didn't want to do this because I knew they would show up 20 minutes later and the guy would be gone, and then they would write something down and nothing would come of it. But I did it to put everyone else at ease. And sure enough, that's what happened. They kept asking me questions about his appearance, like hair color, and I didn't know because he had a gas mask on his whole head. Safe to say, I never returned to those woods again. When I was about 9 years old, my family and I lived in a house with a fairly big wooded area behind our backyard. I say fairly big because it wasn't big enough that you could really get lost in it for very long. It was big enough that you could walk in it for a good 20 minutes before making it to the center. It got thick in some areas, but you couldn't see any houses from the neighborhood once inside. To my friends and I, it was a magical world. We played in those woods all summer long. My mom would let us go there as long as we were back by sundown. This was the early 90s, and times were a little different then. My best friend would come over, and we would run out there and play for hours. We played all sorts of games in there, but our favorite thing to do was climb the trees. We had a favorite tree to climb as well. It was a huge pine out towards the middle of the woods. The branches at the bottom were low enough that we could grab and pull ourselves up, and the branches leading up were all very strong. We could climb high and see a view from above most of the other trees. Sometimes when I got bored at home, I'd go out there by myself. I'd climb high in that tree and just think about stuff. I loved being up there. It was so peaceful and calm. One Sunday, I decided to go on a solo mission in the evening. I knew I didn't have too long before dark, so I hurried into the woods to get a good climb in. I was up in my spot in no time. I remember it was late summer, and the weather was still warm into the evening. I wanted to be able to see a little bit of sunset. Then I climbed down and hurried home. I just sat up there and daydreamed as I waited for the sun to begin to set. Then I heard a twig snap on the ground, and I looked straight down and saw a man standing at the base of the tree looking up at me. I remember he was wearing a filthy brown jacket, and he had a patchy beard. His hair was sticking up at random places, looking like he had been relentlessly running his fingers through it. He was just staring at me with a bizarre expression that seemed to be one of wonder and delight. It was an extremely unnerving look, almost a look of somebody that just realized they stumbled across the gold at the end of a rainbow. That's the only way I can describe it. It made my blood run cold. I went completely numb. I didn't know how long he had been watching me before I noticed him. We just stared at each other for a moment. He didn't say anything, and neither did I. It sounds strange, but I didn't want to scream or tell him to go away because I had this feeling that told me not to provoke him in any way. After a few minutes, he spoke and said, "Are you coming down anytime soon?" I shook my head back and forth. I didn't know what to say. It was clear I was very uncomfortable at this point, and that should be enough to make a decent person go away, but he only grinned at me. Then he reached his hand up and grabbed the bottom branch of the tree, as if to test it to see if it could hold him. I do believe he might have been planning to climb up to me, but the lowest branch was flimsy and it was not strong enough to hold a grown adult. He soon realized this and gave up, but I had seen enough. I finally broke my silence and started to yell for somebody to help me. I kept screaming and screaming. The man backed away a step or two from the tree and began to mumble and curse under his breath. He flailed his arms up in the air in rage and began making a motion like he was pushing an invisible person in front of him. Eventually, he turned and walked away, sort of stumbling with each step. I don't think anybody heard my cries because nobody came to help me. I stayed up in that tree for what felt like hours because I wasn't sure if he was really gone. Finally, I climbed down because the sun was beginning to set and I couldn't bear to be out there at night. I hit the ground and bolted back to my house, positive that the man would pop out of a shadow and grab me. He never did. I made it home and told my parents. My dad went out to look in the woods, but he never saw anybody. We stayed in that house for about another 2 years before we moved across town to a larger one. I never played in those woods again for the rest of our time there.